listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, calls grow for a complete overhaul of the rules for politicians' expenses as the controversy continues over Federal Communications Minister Anika Wells. There's been more revelations about her extravagant expenses, and while she didn't breach any official rules, experts say in the middle of a cost of living crisis, it's certainly not a good look. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Monday, the 8th of December. After months of speculation, Barnaby Joyce has officially announced he is defecting to One Nation. Mr Joyce appeared on Tamworth Community Radio Station 99.8 FM alongside One Nation leader Pauline Hanson to confirm the move, saying he believes One Nation aligns more closely with his views.
Working with people like such as Pauline, I think I have a fellow traveller, and I have great respect for the work that Pauline has done. She has driven the political agenda. She has made us, when I was with the coalition, react to where she has gone, and that has been an incredibly positive thing for our nation.
Miss Hanson says she's emotional about the move, calling Mr Joyce a major boost for the party. Mr Joyce will stay on as the member for New England in the lower house, but plans to run for the Senate with One Nation at the next federal election. A New South Wales National Parks firefighter has been killed during bushfire prevention work north of Newcastle. The 59-year-old was struck by a falling tree. Authorities say he went into cardiac arrest and CPR was performed, but he sadly passed away at the scene. The man was an experienced firefighter who'd been with the service since 1996. New South Wales Premier Chris Minns says his death is a devastating reminder of the dangers that crews face.
Obviously terrible and a reminder of how difficult and dangerous this work is, and how the people who put their lives on the line to protect lives and property do an incredible job for us in this state. Obviously, officials are in the process of contacting that firefighter's family, but it's a deeply distressing turn of events and a sad day for New South Wales this morning.
And pop star Katy Perry and former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have gone Instagram official. Perry posted a photo of the pair cheek to cheek along with a video of them eating sushi in Japan, confirming months of speculation about their romance. Trudeau later reshared a photo of the couple meeting Japan's former Prime Minister, writing, "Katy and I were so glad to sit down with you." Now it's time to get into our deep dive with the Australian Financial Review's political editor Phil Coorey over new revelations about the Federal Communications Minister Anika Wells and her taxpayer-funded trips. Phil was actually at the infamous New York event, which is now under scrutiny for the minister, and says at the time he could see the taxpayer-funded trip was a controversial decision. Adding even if it was within the rules, which it was, sometimes it's all about optics, especially in a cost of living crisis. Phil, thanks so much for joining us. Anika Wells is certainly under the spotlight and being heavily criticised for her parliamentary expenses. Can you give us the detail about why people are concerned?
It's all, I hate the word, Tash, but it's optics. I mean, as Jay Weatherall, when he was the Premier of South Australia, once defending a pay rise for politicians, he said if the public had their way, they wouldn't pay us at all. And that's sort of the starting position for most people's attitudes towards politicians. So, look, they have busy jobs. Their jobs often require them to fly around the country and internationally and spend long times away from families. So there are sort of rules, what we call entitlements, that enable them to sort of, claim certain things, and which is obvious, costs of doing the job, eating, drinking, flying. And there's a family reunion component which allows you from time to time to bring your husband, wife or kids or whatever to join you. But I guess the bottom line is just because those entitlements exist, it doesn't mean you have to use them and use them to the max. And this is the problem Anika's run into, that she seems to have a penchant, if you like, for I'm allowed to do it, so I'm doing it. Now, I've been around a long time. A lot of politicians have been around a long time. And most of them are very judicious and cautious about using these entitlements because it all goes on the public record and it inevitably gets revealed. And if you are one of these people who likes to sort of live on the edge a bit, it's inevitable that it gets out and someone puts it out, and that's what we're seeing now. So in her capacity predominantly as sports minister, where she goes to a lot of things, footy grand finals, Grand Prix, things like that. You know, there's all these stories about how she's brought the whole family along, or the husband along, to quite a lot of them under the family reunion. But it's not limited to that. There was the trip to Adelaide where just, coincidentally a friend of hers was having a birthday party and she managed to find a reason to go to Adelaide on a weekend. And I've seen that before. I've seen politicians that want to go to a wedding or something like that. So you arrange a press conference or go and inspect something to justify the trip. And, they all do it, but it's just, if you do it too much, you get pinged, and she's been pinged, I think.
Phil, in regards to let's breaking down what the concern is over these expenses, you mentioned before it seems to centre around these family reunion entitlements. And there are reports that her husband travelled to a number of AFL grand finals. She was a guest of the AFL, so didn't even have to pay for the tickets. They went to Thredbo skiing and a number of other events, official events she was at, but then claims the taxpayer dollar to ensure her family can attend. Now, what's important to note here, she actually hasn't done technically anything wrong, has she?
No, that's right. Everything's within the rules. But as I was sort of saying, you've got to just be judicious about, the way you live within the rules, because it does start to look indulgent. And the thing is, Taj, it's been a pretty hard time out there for a lot of people with the cost of living. And when they see this stuff, it just makes them angry, right? So, so even though you're allowed to do it, it's just think twice before you do it. I mean, okay, she had to go to Thredbo for a Paralympic event in her capacity as sports minister, but hey, bring the whole family over. Okay, maybe if you just do that for a weekend, that's okay. But when, you go to 3 AFL grand finals, the Formula One and stuff like that, it starts to look more than just family reunion. It starts to look like, hey, I can get free tickets to everything and bring the family along. And that's the way it looks. I know people in the sporting world who casually refer to Anika as the Minister for Scarves because she leans pretty heavily into the, can we have tickets for this, tickets for that? She loves the publicity of having a scarf wrapped around her neck, whether it's Matildas or it's the Olympics or it's, rugby or AFL or whatever. She doesn't need encouragement. I mean, as sports minister, you do get asked to go to all these things and it's part of the job to go to them, but there's a happy medium. So I don't want to sort of punch down on her or anything like that, but I just think, I just know, and all her colleagues think the same thing. You've just lent into it too heavily, into the free stuff. And it just rankles people. It really does. And I drew a comparison on the weekend to, say, Anthony Albanese's wedding. So he, as he gets Kirribilli and the Lodge, they're his official residences. He can do what he likes. And he got married last Saturday, and he had the cheapest wedding you could. He did it at the Lodge. He only invited about 50 or 60 people. He and Jodie paid for everything. Like, they paid for this, even though he has his own kitchen staff and everything, they paid all the staff wages, they paid the catering, they paid the marquee, the chairs, the table, even the straws they paid for. The only thing he didn't pay for was venue hire, but it is his house. And it would have cost more to go somewhere else because the security costs would have been enormous. The Lodge can be locked down. Now, he could have had a massive show at Kirribilli, 300 guests on the harbour. That's being judicious about it. That's being mindful of people's and voter sensitivity. A friend of mine recounted a great story on the weekend. Peter Costello was treasurer, and they were at the Pierre Hotel in New York. And they looked at the breakfast menu, and it was $100 a throw. And that's for those US dollars. And he just said to all the staff at the table, we're all having porridge, Because
he knew it wouldn't pass the pub test. On that point.
Well, it would come up in estimates or something like that. Yeah, and they'd all get pinged for having $100 bacon and eggs.
There was even a report that the communications minister had attended a dinner overseas with 4 people for $1,000.
Plus the
You
booze
mentioned
bill.
earlier, that people are finding it really tough right now. Cost of living crisis, interest rates, energy bills. Do you think we need to have a complete overhaul of what politicians can claim? Because many would say this is just a gravy train.
Well, that's how it looks. That's right. But I don't think we do need an overhaul, Tash, because this sort of pops up every few years, doesn't it? There's always some MP who can't help themselves, and then someone starts leaking all this stuff, and we have this. But these rules sort of stem from previous sort of abuses of the rules, and they are independently monitored. They may need a tightening up, but it's such a grey area in politics, what's work and what's play, because their work life never ends, right? So at the end of the day, a lot of it has to just come down to good judgment by the individual, and by and large, they work. They work pretty well. Most people don't abuse them. Most people use them respectfully and as needed. And they know that everything they do is on the public record. So ultimately they can get into trouble. So I'm not sure that needs an overhaul. Maybe every few years they could just have a bit of a review to make sure there's not things that can't be done better or tightened up. But you got to be a bit careful, otherwise, no one will do the job.
Interesting, you can say, certainly in politics, and you'd know this firsthand, leaks are often agenda-driven. Why is the focus on the communications minister right now? Because there is a lot of leaking going on.
I think what happened was last week we had what's called Senate estimates, where they get to go over, the opposition senators get to sort of have departmental officials in for a whole day and can actually get some real answers out of people. And it emerged from that trip to New York by Anika in September to attend the social media ban thing, and the $100,000 is in plane fares for 3 people. That wasn't as sports minister, that was as communications minister, and that really sort of, I think, had people saying, well, what else has she done? So, various dirt units go to work, and she may have some detractors who might ring a journalist and say, oh, you might want to have a look at this and that. And once someone opens the can on you, it can get pretty embarrassing. And, one of the problems, or one of the risks in politics is what we call mutually assured distraction. If one side wants to start doing it to one side, Labor will say, okay, well, how about this? And they get their dirt unit to look. So, that's where this thing is up to. But that trip to New York, I mean, that was just ludicrous in terms of the cost. And I don't blame her solely for that. I blame the government as a whole. I was at that event in New York. We flew over with the PM for the United Nations, General Assembly, and it's a big week. Big important thing. And on the sidelines, Australia was having this sort of little event to promote the social media ban. Now, Wells had to miss the flight on the Prime Minister's plane because of the Optus outage, which is the right thing to do. She's the Minister for Communications. That was a far more serious issue that had to be dealt with. And so I think the event was in New York on the Wednesday, and they were telling us, she may or may not make it, depending on the Optus thing. And what obviously happened is that right at the last minute, someone jumped online and said, I can get us 3 business class tickets to America. During United Nations Week, you couldn't do anything more expensive if you tried. And that's why the fares were so crazy. But 2 things here, Tash. First is she probably shouldn't have left Australia anyhow, because that Optus story was a lot more serious issue to deal with than, sort of going glad-handing at the UN. So the fact she left Australia, I think, was the first error in judgment. And I remember I was with my mate, a couple of mates. We were over there, a couple of media guys, and Anika turned up. And it was a nice event. It was a good event, but she didn't do much. She emceed it, right? She sort of introduced the PM, then she introduced the next speaker, and then the next speaker, and that was it. I remember saying to Tom McElroy from The Guardian, I said, geez, that's a long way to come. I hope this hasn't cost them too much. This could backfire on them. I could have emceed the bloody thing, or it didn't take. So she sort of got, she was buggered both ways, I think, A, for leaving in the middle of the crisis, and then, someone should have seen those plane fares. Someone somewhere should have said, look, stay home and deal with Optus, especially at this cost. You're damned either way. Now, the PM's office, I think, as well, should have noted that. But they were so eager to have this event. They were so because they had a couple of world leaders there. And, I think just everyone's judgment went out the window. That's to me, is the far more sort of egregious, silly thing in all of this, rather than the footy finals and stuff. But, as I said, Tash, you've got to be a bit careful, because as Weatherall said, if people had their way, you wouldn't even pay these people. So it's a fine balance, and you've got to be careful. When every time something like this happens, it annoys all the MPs, because the ones who try and do the right thing. Remember the Bronwyn Bishop helicopter? Remember what that did? No one's been game to get in a helicopter since that, so it just takes one person just to, sort of lose their judgment, and it reflects on all of them.
Getting the balance right. The other big political story today, Phil, is, of course, Barnaby Joyce. Some are saying it's the worst kept secret, as we know, in Australian politics at the moment. He's confirmed he is set to join One Nation. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I actually wrote it 2 months ago it was going to happen, and he's been denying it ever since. So there you go. Sometimes we are right. Look, it's just an act of utmost selfishness, Tash. It really is. I mean, he is who he is because of the National Party. It's his whole career, his whole public profile he owes to that party. He had the privilege of leading that party twice, of being Deputy Prime Minister. And because he can no longer get what he wants, that is like a leadership position or a ministerial position, he's basically sulked off. By his own admission, he said that. The 2 reasons he wanted out was because of the net zero thing. Well, they've got rid of that. And the other one because David Littleproud won't promote me. I can't be a minister anymore. So people are rat on their party. It's an unsavoury thing to do. Yeah, the theory is that he needs the money because, he's got a couple of families to support. Because the plan is, Tash, in the 28 election, he will run for the Senate in New South Wales and he should win that spot. And then Pauline Hanson will recontest and win her Queensland spot. But she'll be 74 by then, so she'll hand over soon. You can do that in the Senate. You can give your job to someone else, called a casual vacancy. So Barnaby will take the leadership and they'll have at least 5 senators. And once you have 5, that gives you party status. So he'll get an extra $100,000 a year in pay. And so he gets his leadership and he gets a big whack in salary and he's got a 6-year job. And, he doesn't have to get re-elected after 3 years. So that's the operating theory as to why he's doing it, because these things, he says, you can't have any impact from the backbench. Well, him and Matt Canavan just destroyed net zero in less than 2 weeks, so you can have impact from the backbench. So, look, everyone around him thinks it's an act of selfishness, that he's turned his back on the party that gave him everything. And, for Barnaby, all his foibles, all his travails, they're self-inflicted. No one made him do the things he did, whether it's the drinking or the infidelity or everything else. It's all come in spinner stuff. He's probably got away with a lot more than most other politicians. As one of the female cabinet ministers in the Labor Party said to me, "Can you imagine if there's a woman drunk on the street with the legs in the air? You really think she'd still be in Parliament?" So he's been given enormous grace, he's been given enormous tolerance, and he's been forgiven many times.
We'll watch with great interest. Really appreciate your time and your great analysis as always. Thanks so much, Phil.
Oh, it's a pleasure, anytime.
That was Phil Coorey, political editor at the Australian Financial Review. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. Thanks for your company.